Good morning, everybody. Today is July 5th, right after Independence Day. Hope everyone had a good 4th of July. So there's been some time since the Bashar al-Assad government fell to former al-Qaeda heads. So we wanted to take a moment today to kind of update everybody on the events that have transpired with the new leadership there and some of the new posturing between the West and that current Syrian government. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Senator Richard Black.
Thank you, Morgan. You know, it is difficult for Americans when the tiny handful of people who really become involved in foreign policy, it's very difficult for them to understand a world devoid of morality, a world in which nothing counts but power, and all of the Western concepts that we have of good and evil are cast aside. We're brought up to, just think of demons. We talk about Adolf Hitler, we talk about Joseph Stalin, we talk about Mao Zedong, as though somehow this is all past tense, that all of these things are somehow in the rearview mirror. And then we label things like, we say Iran is the greatest sponsor of terrorism with hardly any foundation, but it's just repeated and repeated thousands of times to where after a while you just say, yeah, I've always heard this. No foundation for it. And then in the midst of it, we raise up people who are so demonic to implement our foreign policy that for people who are not involved in the foreign policy arena, it's just sort of incomprehensible. If you just hear about it, it's like, well, this can't possibly be. The idea that we would do things that are worse than anything that Adolf Hitler ever conceived of, rubbish. Nobody could think of such a thing. But we have this new president of Syria, put in power by the CIA, British MI6, Mossad, all of these intelligence agencies, which their common theme is that they are devoid of any human morality. And to them, terror is a tool in the toolkit, and it's an instrument to be used. And then the populations of countries, whether it's Israel, the United States, places in Europe, the populations are to be indoctrinated, to be given sort of screened out propaganda, and all of this other stuff is to be hidden from them. So we have this fellow who takes over as the president of Syria, and here he is, al-Jilani, Mohammed al-Jilani, who was the founder of al-Qaeda in Syria. And just to remind listeners, al-Qaeda was the group that crashed the planes into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon on 9/11, killing 3,000 Americans, biggest bloodletting of Americans by a foreign power in our history. And just 10 years later, the way that foreign policy works, who knows all the details of what was involved in 9/11, but we do know that the perpetrators, the people who actually carried out the attack, were, with several exceptions, all Saudi Arabians. They came from Saudi Arabia. They didn't come from Iraq. They didn't come from Syria. They didn't come from Libya. They came from Saudi Arabia. We've never done anything to take revenge on Saudi Arabia for what happened on 9/11. So we have this fellow, Mohammed al-Jilani, and he was the founder of Al-Qaeda, pledged his allegiance to Al-Qaeda. He made a comment to a reporter, the first person who ever interviewed him, and he said, anyone who tells you the Islamic world was not cheering for what happened on 9/11 is lying to you. And this fellow, his organization responsible probably for beheading tens of thousands of helpless people, some of them prisoners of war, many of them just civilians, many women, many children, responsible for crucifixions, for immolations. So he had a $10 million bounty on him by the United States, and there were advertisements on the website. Literally, when he first became president, this man who is there shaking hands with President Trump now, he took power before President Trump came in. Trump has been sort of left, to deal with, well, what do we do with the situation now? I'm not sure that it's being handled well at all. It's not. But here's, okay, stop this terrorist, Mohammed al-Jilani. There he is. That is the man, $10 million reward by the United States as a terrorist. Now, you won't see this on the mainstream media. They don't show his picture. They'll show the picture of him shaking hands with President Trump, because now he's carrying out the desires of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Turkish government and other Saudi Arabians, all forces of just profound evil. And so here he is now. When he was elected president, literally the following day, he cast aside his military garb. He slicks down his hair. He puts on a suit and tie. He changes his name to al-Shara, and he becomes a moderate. Now, he is still widely known within Syria as Mohammed al-Jilani. And what he did, according to the Jerusalem Post, as soon as he was in power, he abolished the Constitution. Now, the Constitution of Syria was a very excellent document. I've read it personally more than once, and it guaranteed religious freedom in 3 different places. It guaranteed women's equality, recognizing that they had not achieved it, and it had aspirational terms. In other words, we will achieve certain things. So it didn't try to hide the fact that there were things to be accomplished, but they were dead serious about bringing women into equality with people, and just had mapped out a whole series of freedoms that were very much the desire of President Bashar al-Assad and his wife Asma Assad, who have been demonized in the press. He's a tyrant. He's this and that. He and his wife lived very modest lives, contrary to what is being portrayed. Very modest lives, and I have been in his office. I have sat with him and his wife on one occasion. Now she she contracted breast cancer after that and was undergoing treatment the second time that I was there. But when you, neither of them wanted to be in the role of president and first lady. They wanted to go off. He wanted to be a doctor. They were living in London, and she was about to take an important role with Goldman Sachs, and then his brother was killed in an auto accident. His brother was sort of the heir apparent, and at that point, the father ordered him to return home. And he was married. He married then. They were very much in love. And when the two of them were to get together, they were young, and you just sensed the feelings of love and respect and affection between these two people. They lived a very westernized lifestyle, and I took note of the fact that President Assad, who's a very mild-mannered person, very, very highly intellectual, when his wife spoke, she had a little more pizzazz and charisma. He was very serious about things, but both of them very precise in their manner of speaking, highly, highly intelligent. And when she spoke, though, just looking at the body language, when she would speak, he folded his hands in his lap, and there was almost this feeling of just this tremendous mutual respect and love. And President Assad told me, he joked a little. He said, our children say, Papa, when you're out there, so you're the president. But when you're at home, Mama's the president. So they're very, very westernized lifestyle. And
yeah, you don't see that angle with the media, how they portrayed him. And something that would constantly, that came to my mind when Syria, the Bashar al-Assad government had fallen, was before Gaddafi was murdered with the, how we engaged in Libya. He had called all of the Arab nations together. I'm not sure if you remember what I'm referring to, where he gives this speech, says we need to unite, or we'll all be toppled. And it pans over to Bashar al-Assad, where he's giggling at that remark, and it's just kind of appalling to see, what had happened to Gaddafi shortly after, and now what we achieved in Syria. So I wish I had added that clip, but it's a very chilling clip, because it just foreshadows what's going to happen to both of those leaders, and the different tactics that they decided to take, and understanding the severity of what was really happening to them.
Yes. And the Western media is sort of designed in such a way that they create caricatures of real live human beings, and they warp and distort the public perception so dramatically. Now, we see this with Mohammed al-Jilani, who has taken on the name al-Shara, and we see him now being paraded around, taking photos with President Trump and this kind of thing. Now, if you were to describe his administration in one word, I would say hideous would be the appropriate term. When Jilani abolished the Syrian constitution, what's taken its place, and I have spoken to to Syrians with very direct contact on the ground right at this moment. And the rule of law, which was very strong in Syria, the constitution was strong, the laws were strong, the laws enacted by the parliament of Syria. And now the courthouses have been burned down in many places, and the law has been replaced by the bearded ones. Now, the bearded ones are the Islamic authorities that were trained by Saudi Arabia, which practices this 7th century version of Islam. It's often called Wahhabism, and it teaches things like in battle, a man who seizes a woman with his strong right arm in battle owns her. Now, this is much the same concept of ownership as what slavery was, back before the Civil War. This idea that you own people as property, not just that you control them as people that you somehow have domination over, but that they are property in the same sense that a horse or a mule or a cow is property. Now, under this president al-Julani, now called al-Shara, it's the bearded ones. The Islamic clerics have replaced the courts, and so if something is troubling to someone, who did they go to? They go to the bearded ones, who despise everyone, especially Christians or the Alawites. Now, the Alawites, there's never a whisper of this in any Western media, but throughout Syria, every Syrian knows that the Alawites are referred to as the friends of the Christians. The Alawites are the most educated, along with Christians, both of them, the most educated, the most professional, doctors, lawyers, engineers. They tend to be far, far more intelligent than the ordinary folks, far more sophisticated in terms of their legal relationships with people, and very, very westernized. And when you read about the Alawites in Western media, it's like, oh well, this was the tribe that President Assad, the tyrant, the dictator, came from. Now Assad was constitutionally elected. You can call him a dictator, but he was constitutionally elected. We never refer to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia as a dictator. And he is unconstrained. If he says, I didn't like my bowl of Cheerios this morning, I want 50 people pulled out into the square and beheaded today. He can do it. He
Or
can do it.
Jamal Khashoggi, the American,
Yeah.
or I think he was seeking asylum or seeking citizenship in America. Pardon me. But he was.
I think he was actually getting a wedding or a marriage license.
Yes,
wasn't he?
from an embassy in Turkey. And it just happened in broad daylight, as blatant as it could be. And there was, a few segments on it, but there wasn't, this vilification that we see that rightfully so should have happened.
Yeah, and
To
while his betrothed is sitting out in the car waiting for him, inside they suffocate him to death with a plastic bag over his head, cut him apart. I mean, I don't know if they used chainsaws or what, but they severed him into little packages, put it all into a suitcase, and they walked out with his
yeah,
parts in the suitcase.
I think one of
And
the murderers wore his clothes for it to be caught on camera. It was just it was
Mhm.
so in your face, blatant. So it was because they knew they could get away with it. Given the protection of the West. Um, I want to kind of pivot and remind people that our elected officials know who this leader in Syria is. There is no, um, pulling the wool over their eyes. Oh, they can claim that they didn't understand. Back when Tulsi Gabbard was giving her confirmation hearing, she goes into such. So I want to just play this short clip for us, just so we can all understand that they know exactly who this person is.
We have leaders who cozy up to Islamist extremists, minimizing them to so-called rebels. As Jake Sullivan said to Hillary Clinton, quote, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Well, Syria is now controlled by an Al-Qaeda offshoot, HTS, led by an Islamist jihadist who danced in the streets on 9/11 and who is responsible for the killing of many American service members.
And she's referring to Al-Jilani.
Yes.
And now, by the way, Tulsi Gabbard is one of the most heroic people in American politics. I discovered her when I wrote a letter to every member of Congress explaining in undeniable detail what was going on in Syria and how we were on the side of Al-Qaeda, and everything was documented to a T. And she wrote back a letter that displayed such thorough comprehension of what was going on that I was just stunned. It's the only time in my entire life that I have been so impressed by something that I wrote and commented on her letter, not just to add something additional, but just how remarkable it was, the insight that her letter showed. She knows precisely what's going on, and that is the reason that you see comments saying that, well, maybe it's time for her to be removed from her post.
Mm-hmm.
She knows too much, and she is not a convenient liar. So she does know. Now, the one thing that I really wanted to focus on, this group that came with President Al-Jilani to take over the presidency and to rule Syria. They came out of Idlib province, where they were responsible for enormous beheadings and torture of all sorts. They have launched a revenge war on the Alawite people, the Friends of the Christians, and they just go out randomly and kill people. And they do it in the most humiliating way that they can. So they force the men to crawl along on the ground, and then when they're completely exhausted, then they harass them and pistol whip them, and then they just kill them. And the order went out after the initial information became very public, and the order was, and this was, I think, reported in the Jerusalem Post, quote, turn off cameras, kill every male. Now, there's a reason for killing every male, and that is because it is the practice of Al-Qaeda to engage in chattel slavery. And there is this belief that whatever women you can capture, then you own them. You own them like you own a horse or a cow. And under Islamic law, the very primitive Islamic law, it is lawful to conduct intercourse with a child as early as 7 years old. A tiny little girl, 7 years old, you can have penetration by a grown man and just do horrific injury to the child. This is condoned by this primitive form of Islam. And so I know as of yesterday that there are now slave markets established, and they are under the groups that are run by Al-Jilani, and women are being purchased, they're being bought and sold in an identical fashion to what was happening in slave markets back in the United States back in the 1830s, say, where people would be brought up and they'd be put on display on the stand, and people would cast their bids.
Mhm.
Now, and the only difference is that in the United States they were being sold as workers, as field workers, whereas in Syria they are being sold as rape victims. That here's a little child, you can purchase this child, you can rape this child to her death. Here's a woman, you can rape her, you can impregnate her, she will be your slave. What am I bid? And this is happening all over in the areas where Alawites have populated certain areas. And I think while we may not be able to reform this government into something respectable, we have powerful tools that we can apply to make it clear that if the Alawites continue to be slaughtered, if chattel slavery is still permitted, then we are not lifting sanctions. And we should do this. I really despise sanctions, but we enacted the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, and we made slavery unlawful within the United States. And here it is, 2025, and we are encouraging and condoning chattel slavery in Syria, a country that we spent, 15 years, 20 years, I suppose, undermining and overthrowing the legitimate constitutional government and putting in place the head of Al-Qaeda. And now here we are, very much complicit in the enslavement of Alawite women, and this, in the aftermath of the Civil War, this would have been an outrage. The idea that somehow there were officials who were involved in reinstituting slavery, and yet here we are, all this time later, and after all of the Black Lives Matter hoopla and all of this stuff, Americans don't know that overseas in the nation of Syria, we are deeply complicit in the establishment of slave markets to buy and sell and establish a market price for women.
Mm-hmm.
And if Americans had the slightest inkling of what goes on in American foreign policy, it would turn their stomachs. And it's a great shame. I mean, I come with very Western, very Christian morals and vantage point, and it's deeply disturbing to me that we are being drawn into this. There are evil things that go on in the world. There are evil things that go on in the United States. But you don't have to opt to become a part of it, and we certainly should not.
I agree, and it's a tragedy that the Western governments aren't giving this the acknowledgement that it deserves to try and stop this or hamper down on this. But I guess this is partly what they wanted. They want the chaos. They want the city to be in, or the state to be in turmoil, so they can um, use their get what they want in a way. I know that we had so much more to talk about today, but given that it's a holiday weekend, we wanted to keep this a short show. So I just wanted to see if you have any concluding remarks, Senator.
Well, I hope you have a good 4th of July holiday and enjoy the rest of your weekend. We appreciate all that you do, Morgan. And
Oh,
so,
I am honored to be on this show with you, honestly. So that means a lot coming from you, but the honor is all mine.
well, thank you so much. And you have a good weekend, and I will too.
Sounds good. Well, catch us next week to focus on the news. Thank you, everybody.